Okay, well, I think I've given enough time for anybody to come in from the hall. Oh, there's more coming in as well. So thank you for coming back and joining for this extra session on the security workshop. We had, turn it down just a little bit? It's just getting the feedback echo. There we go. Yeah, I think that's okay. Thanks. Welcome to the special third extra session for the security workshop. If you remember in the first session on Monday, we did the voting for the people in the room. You said what topics were of most interest to you. We spent the entire session on DDoS, attacks and mitigations, and a lot of questions and discussions on that. So this is just going to be a continuation where we look at the next topic that was the most voted upon. So it was just on cybersecurity basics. And while this is a fundamental core topic, hopefully I do describe things in different ways that you may have heard them before and look at information in a slightly different way. But it is setting a framework and a groundwork of definitions and terminology and making sure that everybody is using the right language for cybersecurity. So one of the first things to look at is what is the definition for security, and here I'm using information security. So we're looking at the practice of preventing unauthorized use, disclosure, access, disruption, modification, inspection, recording, and destruction of information. So basically any sort of unauthorized activity that could be done against the information or the data that it is. And when we look at information security management, it is the management of information security to ensure business continuity and reducing business damage by minimizing the impact of security incidents. Now, this is an important thing. Information security management is not about making the organization perfectly secure. It is about business continuity and reducing damage. No organization will ever be 100% secure, and every organization will have a certain level of risk that they are happy to accept. And it's a matter of bringing that risk down, bringing the damage that can be caused by attackers down to an acceptable level. And when we talk about business here, this can be business in your organizations, in your departments, in your universities, but it also can translate to the business of your family. If you have a family, even if it's just yourself and your family, you have to treat your life as a business in all of the certain aspects. You have your own personal accounts, your own access, your own finances and everything, and you have to treat that in the same way. You have to be reducing your own personal damage that can be caused by attackers trying to cause harm to you and your bank accounts. Now, you'll notice I mentioned information security here and some others along the bottom. When it comes to security, it changes over time. You know, for anybody that is a bit old school and a little bit of gray in the beard, we'll be calling it information security or InfoSec. The whole concept of cyber security is a new term. IT security sometimes gets used as well as internet security. For the purpose of all of the training that I deliver, these are all the same thing. If you try and look up online a definition or a difference and comparison between information security and cybersecurity, you will find 100 different definitions and 100 different comparisons. Some of them will even draw a Venn diagram of the circles that overlap, trying to say, oh, this is information security here, this is cyber security, and this is IT security, and trying to put something to it. But you'll also find 100 different diagrams that show the differences as well. There is no concrete definition for what these things are. Everybody has their own opinion. And because of that, I put them all equivalent to each other. So you may hear me say information security and cybersecurity. They're interchangeable for all of my presentations. So when we look at security, we have to start off with why are we doing information security? And we can highlight that with some very good public information that is available on different data breaches and exposures of information that have happened. This is from a website called Information is Beautiful, and it basically is a chronological listing of different major security data breaches. Different sizes of the circles are defined by how much information was leaked, and the yellow ones provide more notable information. You can hover over the different bubbles. It's an interactive website, and if you click on them, it actually will bring up more information relating to it. So this very large circle, for example, is from Facebook's data breach in March of 2021. This is where 533 million records of information that were lost. So really interesting information. This website is very useful. We're in the age of 2024 now, where information like this is a lot more public. When I first started in cybersecurity, it wasn't very public. People would have a security incident and they would keep it private. They didn't do reporting, they didn't do publishing, they didn't notify anybody, they just kept it quiet and dealt with it internally. This made it very hard to prove to certain organizations that security is something that is a problem for everyone. Through information sources like this, you can see that every country, every economy is being affected. Every sector, every industry is being affected. Every size of organization is being affected. No longer can anyone say, oh, I don't work in an internet-based organization, I just work for a mining company. Why would anyone try and attack me? Well, you're still on the internet. Even though the internet is not your core business, you use the internet as a resource. Other people saying, oh, I'm just a small organization, why would anyone try and attack me? Well, they don't care that you're a small organization. They just look for vulnerabilities, they look for weak points, and they look for people that they can hopefully extort some money out from. So websites like this give you that information where you can go through and look at the information that is there. Now, these are data breaches of all sorts of data and information. Phone numbers, names, email addresses, lots of different records of information. Some of them include driver's license and passport numbers, even credit card numbers as well. Another type of data breach that we can look at is looking at password database breaches. This is using a website called Have I Been Pwned? This website is run by an Australian, not me, but he lives near me. And it tracks data breaches of a specific nature, and that is password databases. Password databases are very critical because if you leak out a username and a password, then an attacker can log in immediately as that user and perform actions as that user. You combine that with the fact that a lot of people do not use different passwords on different websites. So if one user has their password exposed on one website, the attackers can use that same password again and again and again for every other website that that user is using. Up-to-date information, or at least as of from a couple of days ago, there are 803 websites that have had their databases completely compromised, which leads to 14 billion different accounts and pastes of information. These are bits of password databases that are copied and pasted out onto information sharing websites. So that's what a paste is there. You can see from some of these top numbers here, when LinkedIn had a security data breach, they lost information for 164 million LinkedIn accounts. Adobe had a similarly large data breach as well. The Have I Been Pwned website is quite interesting because not only is it collecting this information, but you can go and search for your own email address on there. If you haven't done that before, I highly recommend that you try that as a small exercise, and you can see which data breaches your email address has appeared in. Additionally, on the more enterprise security side of things, you can actually sign up your entire organization's domain name to be notified if any of your users, of your email addressed users, show up in future data breaches. So that's quite a powerful tool, and most of this is freely accessible. Like the single user stuff, definitely freely available. And another type of data breach that we can look at here is where people go in, attackers go in, and they compromise web servers. And they go in with the purpose of changing web pages and web information. This is called website defacements. And the idea is putting up information that actually talks about the attacker or the attacker's community that they work in. This is sort of like putting graffiti onto a wall saying, you know, hacked by ProSox. Aren't I a wonderful hacker? I can hack into all these websites. There's other ones that, you know, this is that gray hat definition that I was talking about on Monday. Here's one here. Hello, admin. I'm White Hat Hacker. I'm here to help you. I patched your vulnerability. You can now remove this page. So that is somebody, though they're claiming a white hat hacker. In reality, they're gray, but they have hacked into a web server and then fixed the vulnerability, or at least they say they have fixed the vulnerability. So, you know, good intentions on that side of things. Now, for website defacements, there's actually a website called ZoneH, and on this website, it actually keeps a scoreboard or a record of every website that has been defaced and compromised and which attacker or criminal it was that was doing it. This website has been around for at least 20 years. And it's not the easiest website to navigate, but you can go in and do a search. You can do a search for top-level domains like .sb or .pk. Or if you work in the government, you can search for .gov.pk and get a list of those. So you can always go to this website and search for your own domain name or related domain names to see if any of your websites have appeared in this site and this list. Some other ones, you know, we have some other messages put in here. Some of these can get a little bit political at times. I'm trying not to put too many of the overtly political messages on there. But again, it's criminals that are trying to get their message out. And because it is a little bit political, sometimes these are referred to as hacktivists or hacker activists that are trying to push a political message as well. And of course, other types of security incidents and compromises are due to common software being run, publicly accessible, and not being protected or patched or updated. These are some examples here. You know, mass SQL injection attack is compromising over 70,000 websites. Is your website one of these 50,000 compromised websites? Coordinated website campaign plaguing the internet. And, you know, this great one here where there was a vulnerability in a plugin for a website, but 3 months after the attack that had launched it all and shown the biggest problem, there's still tools in use on over 1,000 websites. So this is 3 months after the major incident where all this common software was happening, and still websites that have malicious tools and are compromised websites on there. So we'll go through some definitions just to set the groundwork for common terminology here. When we talk about an asset that we are protecting, the asset can be both information, so the actual data that you are protecting, but it can also be resources. You know, we're protecting physical devices. We're protecting the CPU processing power. We're protecting the disk space as well from abuse and misuse. Beyond the asset, we then also look at a threat. A threat is a circumstance or event with the potential to negatively impact an asset. It doesn't mean that it will. A threat doesn't mean that it is causing damage. A threat is that it could cause damage. You know, floods are a threat. But it doesn't mean we have a flood outside the door right now. It just means that it is a possibility. Maybe not so much where we are here, but it is a possibility in general. Now, threats can be broken down into a couple large groupings. We have accidental threats, intentional threats, as well as natural threats. The storms, floods, earthquakes that I mentioned before, that's all falling under natural. These are threats. We do have to be concerned about these. We do have to make sure that we are protecting our systems from them. These are some of the simple ones. Not putting your server room on the ground floor or in the basement. Making sure that you have redundant air conditioning. Making sure that you have backup power systems, UPSs, that you have generators and things like that. You know, this is pretty standard things for the physical side of security. For the intentional, these are where people are intentionally causing damage. This can be from traditional hacking, viruses, DDoS attacks, insiders within the organization doing bad things, and just plain up theft. We also have accidental threats. So here we talk about company insiders, and here we talk about user error. These are very, very similar. It just comes down to what is the intent. Someone could type in the wrong number. Someone could put too many zeros into someone's pay account for their finances. If they do it on purpose, they're an insider. If they do it by accident, they're a user error. You know, who here has been typing in commands or typing in a website and you just hit the wrong letter or hit it twice or once instead of twice? Everybody makes simple mistakes. It's a matter of limiting the damage from them. And of course, accidental malfunctions. Sometimes computers and devices just malfunction on their own. You could probably trace the root cause to something specific, but it could be as simple as a solar flare or, solar radiation that just flips a bit. A 1 turns into a 0, and suddenly there's a minor malfunction on a computer system or network. So we've looked at assets and we've looked at threats. The next one that we look at is vulnerabilities. So the vulnerability is a weakness. The weakness can be in the design or the implementation. These are a few categories. There's a lot more. This is just some examples of different types of vulnerabilities that can exist out there. Some are specific to applications. Some are more ingrained into protocols that we have no control over. Oh, where'd my slide go? There we go. Now, when it comes to vulnerabilities, I've been talking about a little bit of physical security as well. And, poor physical security is a vulnerability as well. And there's an example that I have here. This is a great little example. It is from 21 years ago, but this type of thing can happen today. This is also from an Australian-based news report. So I'm not picking on any other country in the world. I'm just talking about my own country. This was an interesting one. So the Sydney International Airport has the Customs and Quarantine Center, and they have a data processing system that handles data for all the cargo processing and all the intelligence that goes back and forth. So on the night of Wednesday, the August 27th, 2 men were dressed as computer technicians. They went into the data center. They presented themselves as working for Electronic Data Systems, or EDS. EDS is a common remote hands type of service that companies use to get work done in data centers. EDS was the outsourced service provider, so they knew the right company for it. They supplied false names and signatures. They were then given access to the data center server room. They knew where the room's location was. They spent 2 hours disconnecting a couple computers. I think one of them was like a disk shelf as well. They put it onto a trolley and wheeled it right out the front door past the security guard. So yeah, if you don't have good physical security, you're not going to have good information security. If someone can walk in, pick up one of your information assets and walk out the door, whether it be a laptop or a server or a USB thumb drive, then you don't have good information security. You don't know where your information is going and how it's getting there. This type of a thing can happen anywhere. What's the vulnerability here? What was the actual weakness that allowed this to happen? The security guard. Yeah, it's the human aspect of things here. They presented themselves, they looked right, but were they authorized to be there? Had someone notified them in advance? And they were supplying false names. Surely that they could have been verified that, the work that they were doing was actually to be required or not. So we've got assets, we've got threats, and we have vulnerabilities. If we put this together, we actually get a risk. A risk is the potential for loss or damage to an asset caused by a threat exploiting a vulnerability. So we put these things together, you get a little flow chart, the sort of thing that falls into there. And from this, you can actually, detail this as a simple mathematical equation. This does simplify it a lot, but, it makes it easy to understand. The risk is the threat multiplied by the vulnerability. If you get rid of the vulnerability, this turns to 0. What happens if you multiply anything by 0? You get 0. So the multiplication is an important part of this. And if one of these goes down low, multiplying it out brings the whole number down as well. Now, this is a very simplistic view. If we want to go a little bit more detailed, what we can do is add on the asset, or the impact to the organization if the asset were to be affected by this threat and vulnerability. So when we multiply the asset by the threat by the vulnerability, now the asset can be a production system, which would have a high value, or the asset could be a test or development server, which may have a low value. Again, the low value dragging the overall risk score down. Looking at it with some mathematical examples, ooh, my animation didn't work too well. No, my animation did not work too well. Okay, I'll just describe it as it is here. So if we look at it here, where we have the exact same threat and we have the exact same vulnerability, if one asset is ranked low because it's a test server, maybe on the inside of the network, versus an asset that is public-facing, production, and business necessary, giving a much higher score, by multiplying those out, you can see that we end up with very different risk score numbers from them. So purely just by going by threat and vulnerability only gives you a very small view of the overall risk and doesn't allow you to prioritize within your large enterprise network. Now, if we're talking about risk within an organizational sense, we sometimes need to speak the language of the enterprise. And sometimes that means taking, oh, my animation is all messed up. I'm sorry about that. Let me just go past and it'll get there. So we're changing asset to impact, and we're changing threat and vulnerability to be likelihood. So these are the terminology that is used by enterprise risk management, or ERM. So we're looking at impact instead of asset, and we're looking at likelihood as that combination of threat and vulnerability. Again, if the vulnerability is 0, then the likelihood ends up, being dropped down right to 0 as well. Now, the way that this can be brought out is we have our impact, which is like the asset, and we have the likelihood, and you can put it onto a risk matrix like this. This is a very simple risk matrix, very theoretical example. People can write these and show these in different ways. This is just using a simple 1 to 5 scale. And the idea here is that if you have something that is a high likelihood, but the impact would be low, you end up with a risk here. And in this case, we're highlighting that as a yellow-orange type of risk. If you have something that is a high likelihood and it's going to have a high impact, then we're going to be putting it up in the top right corner with a high rating, with a red color to it. This allows you to then take the combination of likelihoods and impacts, graphing it out, and then saying, which risks are we going to manage first? Are we going to manage these ones, or up here? So of course, you're going to be managing the red risks first. You're going to take those higher risk items. This can sometimes be shown as a little animated cartoon real world here. You've got a small hole in the ground, small little pothole. It's filled with some water. It's a low likelihood of stepping in because most people can step over it. But if you did happen to step in it, the impact would be quite low. It's only a little bit of water. So low likelihood, low impact, we're putting that down here as a 1-1. You may have a high likelihood. If you have a very large puddle of water that you have to get across, it's a high likelihood you're going to get something wet, but the actual impact is going to be low. It might just be your shoes. So we're putting it up in a 1-5. Down here you have a small pit, but of course it has very sharp pointy spikes. So if you do happen to fall into it, it's going to be a high impact, but it's not going to happen very often. So that one gets put down here in a 5-1. And of course, if you have a very large pit of spikes that is impossible to jump across, that goes up into something that is high likelihood and high impact. So which of these are we going to worry about first? We're going to take this one. We're going to fill in the pit. We're going to build a bridge over it. We're going to find a way to go around it. We're going to put in different measures to help avoid that risk or reduce that risk from it actually happening. So, don't worry about that too much. So looking at different ways of creating scoring, risk scoring, another one that is specific to the technical space is the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or CVSS. CVSS is used by all major software vendors when they are looking at vulnerabilities on their systems and they're wishing to communicate them out. The CVS scoring goes all the way up to out of a score of 10. You can see that 7 years ago, the Apache Struts vulnerability was a perfect 10 out of 10 because it was a very damaging risk, a very damaging vulnerability. But what we can do is we can actually take the score and look beyond the number. Sometimes you'll see this long string here, which is quite complex. You're not sure if you're supposed to even read it as a human or not. But if you actually go to the CVSS calculator website, you can see how these scores are calculated. So you can see, the attack vector. The attack vector, does someone have to be on the keyboard, or can it be attacked over a network? Of course, if it's over the network, it allows anybody to perform the network attack, and therefore it makes it more dangerous. So this brings the score up. Attack complexity. Is this something that only a skilled programmer who has to write their own code and it doesn't always work? Or is this a simple Python script that you can download off GitHub and any 12-year-old could execute this attack? So again, if the complexity is low, that's raising that numerical score. Over on this side, you can see some of the damage that can be caused: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. If the damage to confidentiality on the system is high, that raises the score. And here you can see, because this vulnerability allowed the attacker complete root access to the system, that allowed the attacker to then completely damage confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Once you have root or administrator access on a machine, you can do whatever you want to it. So this is the scenario that allowed this vulnerability to get a perfect score out of 10. So it's just another way of looking at risk, but this allows you to inform into that risk matrix. This gives you the specific information for the vulnerability. And if you have to change this for your environment, there is extensions to this calculator. This is not the end result. This is only one piece of the puzzle. If this vulnerability existed on a test server, or maybe you had other protection mechanisms in place, or maybe it just wasn't an important system at all, that's going to lower the score. So if you actually go to the calculator, there's environmental scores that you can put in. How is this vulnerability in your operational environment? And then you can then adjust the score based on that. It may stay as a perfect 10, but it may also come down, allowing you to prioritize your vulnerability response. Now, I talk about the prioritizing response. The response to these vulnerabilities is mitigation, or to mitigate. That's to reduce the seriousness or severity by applying security controls. These security controls may be web application firewalls, might be traditional network firewalls, might be patching or updating of the system. Controls can be broken into different types of categories or layers. There's lots of layers. The whole internet's based on layers. Controls can be based on layers of a timeline. Before an incident happens, you have preventative controls that prevent a security incident from happening. You then have detective controls that when a security incident is happening, do you have controls to detect that incident? And then corrective or responsive controls. After the security incident has been dealt with, do you have the controls to resume normal operations quickly and efficiently? Now, we can have other layers as well. These layers are by the type of control. You can have legal controls, administrative controls, physical controls, procedural, and even technical controls. So technical is the easy one. When we think about technical problems, we jump to technical solutions. Security patches, antivirus, firewalls. But we have other types of controls that we do have to worry about as well. And we can layer those out, we can take those different groupings of controls and just look at layering them, as with the traditional breakout type of game. It's difficult to get the ball up to the top because of the layers of bricks and the layers of controls. If one of them fails, you have additional layers to provide protection for your systems. So here what we're doing is just taking the types of controls and the time, and we're just doing a cross-section to create a little 3x3 grid. Now, just for initial discussion purposes, we can look at the intersection of administrative and preventative, and we end up with a preventative administrative control. So this type of control in here is looking at something administrative beforehand. So maybe some policies and procedures. Within your organization, you might have a security policy or an acceptable use policy that allows people to understand what can they do on the network and what is not allowed on the network. That type of a thing, sure, it's not going to stop everybody, but it is a layer of control, specifically looking at these non-technical administrative types of controls. In the middle one, we have detective and technical. This is an easy one. What is a common detection type of system? An intrusion detection system. So your IDS would perfectly fit as something to detect an incident. We're not preventing it from happening, but we're detecting when it actually does happen. And on the top right, corrective and physical. So here we're looking after an incident has taken place, and we're looking at the physical response. So for example, if someone was breaking into the building to steal something, they're breaking glass, they're breaking doors. For corrective physical, it might be hiring a security guard to stand there until the door or window can be fixed. Or maybe it's having an on-call phone number so that you can bring a glass company out to replace the glass and provide that security to the building once again. This could also be repairing locks and doors if they'd been broken into that way. So you have to look at the physical side, because remember, physical security leads to good information security as well. Now, it's not just these three, of course, we put the whole 3x3 grid out here, and these are our bricks. We want to make sure that we have layers of control across these, that we're not just doing one type of prevention. If this is the only type of prevention, all you need is somebody who doesn't read the policy or somebody who doesn't want to follow the policy, and they'll be able to get past it. Similarly, you may have technical controls, but there may always be little ways that you can get around technical controls. So you want to have the other layers. You want to have your policies and administrative controls to make sure that people understand what is allowed and what's not allowed. So layers and layers. Now, layers of controls has a fancy name, and that is defense in depth. Defense in depth is that layering of controls to make sure that if there's a weakness in any one point, you have backups to those controls. This is sometimes called the castle approach. Most commonly it's defense in depth, but we can take the name castle approach and we can actually look at some castles, from many years ago and see how they were actually built for layers of control. So this is an interesting one. Very pretty castle, but I like it for its layers. It's Caerphilly Castle, so there's the link if you want to look at it. Oh, I don't have my pictures for here. Okay, I'll point to it. First layer of control for this castle is a moat. So you've got water with a single entry point right here. If you get past that, you have the first wall. You get past that, you have another moat of water protection, more walls. You actually have a third bit of water across here as well. So while it is two main controls, we are looking at layers and layers of them. It's not just simply one moat of water and one wall. This is the understanding that attackers may get past that. Now, of course, in this type of scenario, what you're not seeing is the traditional active defense. archers and boiling oil and things like that. But you can see, points where they would be for active defense. That was more of those layers of control that they would have. Now we can go through a small thought experiment here. If you imagine that you have a bar of gold to protect. So here's an example of a bar of gold. This is actually a very small bar of gold. This one that you see there is approximately 1 kilogram, but a normal, standard size bar of gold is like 12.4 kilograms and worth $500,000 US, approximately, going up. So imagine that you've got a full-sized bar of gold. They're very heavy, worth a lot of money. You're given this bar of gold and you're told to protect it. Now let's work from the inside out. So what's going to be the first container that you put that bar of gold into? Are you going to put it into a backpack or a shoebox or maybe a safe or a vault of some sort? So think about what you would put your bar of gold into. Now, this container that you've put it into, which room are you going to put that container into? Because it, it must be in the building in a room. So is it going to be a room that is very trafficked? Or is it a room that is not very often visited? Is it going to have good lighting, good air conditioning? Do you need air conditioning for a bar of gold? I don't know. Now, that room that the container is in should have a door or more. What locks are going to be on the door? Are you going to have 1 lock, 2 locks, 3 locks? Are they all going to be the same lock, or are they going to be different locks? Thinking also about the use case. When you have to enter this room, you're going to need different keys and go through different processes to open it. So how many locks are you going to have? How expensive? What types are they going to be? Now this room needs to be located in the building. Is it going to have windows out to the outside? Is it going to be on the ground floor? Going to be down in the basement, up on a higher floor, towards the inside or the outside of a building? Think about where that's going to be and how that's going to impact your overall protection of your bar of gold. Now these are all defensive, by the way, or preventative. These along the way are so far preventing someone trying to get to the bar of gold. Detection for somebody trying to break in to steal your bar of gold would be CCTV cameras. So are you going to have cameras pointed at the room, cameras outside the building, cameras pointed at other cameras so that someone can't destroy one camera without being detected by another camera? This is all detection. So how many cameras are you going to have? Now, little secret about cameras, if nobody's watching the camera's not doing a detective work. The camera is there for investigation after the fact. So to do true detection, you're going to need somebody watching the camera to actually go, hey, there's somebody breaking into the building. Now that's detection, but not yet response. To respond, if that security guard stays in his little room watching a camera, that's not going to be enough. You need someone who can then respond and actually stop the thief from breaking in and stealing your bar of gold. So here we've got our prevention, our detection, and our response. So how does that play out? How many layers, how many protection do you have? Now the bonus question at the end of all of this is how much does all of this cost? Because this will cost money. The more prominent where the room is located, the more it's going to cost. The more locks, the more it's going to cost. How many humans are you going to have? Humans cost a lot of money, especially if you want 24-hour monitoring for them as well. Now, if the bar of gold costs $500,000 and all of this costs $500,000, is that a good return on investment for your security protection? Or have you wasted all the value of the bar of gold in this? Because if this costs the bar of gold, you need to protect this as well, don't you? Now, there is one extension to this. How big was that first container that you put the bar of gold into? Is it a small safe or is it a large safe? Because if you have a large safe, you could put more bars of gold. Other people could bring their bars of gold to you and store them in there. And you can then reuse all of this investment to protect more bars of gold, which is largely what a bank does. It's also what a data center does. A data center provides protection for your electronic resources, allowing more people to put their servers and equipment into them for their expenses that they've already put forward. So looking beyond the other definitions, we then look at threat actors. The threat actors are the actors or the people that are trying to cause harm to your systems and to your networks. Now, I've used the word hacker a few times already, and that's because it's in the common vernacular for English-speaking worlds. The word hacker, though, has history, and the history is not of a malicious or illegal nature. It's of people exploring and building. That's why we have hackathons. Hackathons are where programmers get together to hack together and build together a quick prototype for a particular type of project or goal that they're working on. So I use the word hacker because it's easy and it's the common wording and it's what the media is pushing. But the proper name is attacker, malicious actor, threat actor, or just straight up criminal. And that really highlights what is the intention of the person doing this. So where you do see me sometimes call hacker, threat actor, and malicious actor are probably a little bit more appropriate there. Now, these malicious actors can be broken into a few different categories. You can define some more, but these are the big five here. Opportunistic, these are ones that are just browsing around the internet, and then they come across your website, and they see a small error on your website, and they go, I wonder if I can do something different to that error. And they change a number, or they click on something different, and suddenly they've gained access to someone else's information. So they weren't purposefully going there with the intent of breaking into your system, but they saw an opportunity and they took it. Hacktivists, I mentioned before, these are the hacker activists, so usually politically motivated. Cyber criminals, these are the ones going after money. This can be organized crime or disorganized crime, just individuals doing things, but for the purpose of money at this point. Next is the nation states and the government-based attackers. These are the ones that are backed and funded and supported by governments and nation states, largely to do work against other countries and nations. This can be for direct political advantage. This can be for intellectual property to support the industrial complex of an organization or of a nation. But they're government-sponsored and funded, usually quite skilled, because of course the government will only pay money to the best people that they can get to do work. But they are well-funded and supported and protected by their country. And then we have the insiders. We mentioned insider attackers before. They can be intentional or accidental. These are the ones that keep me awake most at night. It's the insiders that already have access to your networks. They have usernames and passwords. You see them every day. They're already in your network, and you don't necessarily know everything that they're doing or what they could do in the future. Oh, no, this was the shorter slide deck. There we go. So yeah, so that's going through the definitions. The other bit that I had was people were asking about the confidentiality, integrity, and availability side of things. So let me bring up that other presentation. So this was the third topic on the voted list of things. Should be able to get through this in the half hour. It's not too long of a piece of content. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability is sometimes called the CIA triad. CIA, of course, not standing for the Central Intelligence Agency, but for those three main words. This is the core tenet of what security professionals are aiming to protect. Now, availability is a really easy one. This is, what network people deal with all the time, aiming for 99.999, the 5 nines or 4 nines or even 100% uptime. But security has to worry about all aspects of these. Confidentiality is protecting unauthorized people from accessing data. So keeping confidential data confidential. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's purely confidential, but a group of people have access and everyone else does not have access. Integrity is looking at the accuracy and completeness of this data, making sure that it has not been modified in a way that is either unauthorized or undetected. And then, of course, for availability, there is a little bit of a spin on this one. The availability in a security context is not always purely the network uptime or system uptime, but it's the availability of information or the availability of a service within expected bounds. Now, the expected bounds can be highlighted as an example with tape backups. If you do tape backups, you should be following the 3-2-1 rule, and some of your tape backups should be sent to an offsite location. Now, if the data center were to have a catastrophic failure and you need to then get those offsite tape backups, it's going to take time. You have to send a vehicle there. They have to find the tape backups, retrieve them, get equipment to then restore onto. And because it's a tape, it's sequential. You have to read off the entire tape to get the data to use it. That's going to take hours of time, but it's expected. Everybody knows it's going to take hours of time to get data off of a tape backup. So there's no way that your backups will always be that 100% online accessible all the time. And that's the expected bounds. It doesn't mean that your tape backups are a failure of availability, as long as you know what is the expected time frame for them. Now there is some.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you go back? Can you go back, please?
Yeah. Didn't know you have.
I went to the first slide.
Yeah, sure.
Can you please go back?
Yeah.
So in this CIA Tri-8, you have three components. Okay. So how do you balance these three components? For example, if you go with the confidentiality,
Yes.
if you enhance it, you may compromise the availability or the integrity. So what's a balanced solution for all these three to implement these solutions?
Good question on that. The balance of this depends upon the asset that you're protecting. So let's go back to the previous presentation, website defacements, right? You have a public website. All organizations have a public website. For a public website, you want availability and you want integrity, but the information is public. So you don't really care about the confidentiality for that public information. So for that particular asset of a public-facing website, you're looking at protecting integrity and availability. And there doesn't necessarily have to be a balance, because these are managed differently, right? You then may have a finance database inside your organization. Now, the finance database doesn't need 100% availability. Finance systems can go down for a day and, whatever, who cares? So the availability can be a little bit lower, but for finance systems, the integrity of financial information is most critical. The confidentiality, depending upon what the financial information is, that might be medium or high. HR systems would be another one. Human resources. That would be highly confidential information, and you would need good integrity, but the availability is down. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to pick two of these. You can have a system that has a strong requirement for both for all of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Especially if you have a public-facing website that people log into that has confidential information that is critical that it is not modified. That's, boom, a combination of all of these. That's something, like a public banking website possibly, would be all of these. So it's not like some of the other aspects of information systems where you have three types of protection or three types of needs, and you can only have two. For something like this, you can have the need for high confidentiality, high integrity, and high availability, because protecting one does not automatically diminish the protection for the others. But it's a matter of balancing, knowing what the asset is and knowing how much protection needs to be put for each one of them. Make sense? But yeah, it's not like the other ones. What is it? I want it fast and I want it cheap, and what's the third? I can't remember, but and more. Yeah. So it's like you can't have all three of those sorts of things. This is a little bit different. You can have all three of this. And for some systems, you may need to. But you do have to understand it. You know, if you have a system that doesn't need 100% availability, you could waste a lot of money over engineering it so that it does have 100% availability. But you're spending too much money on it now. You're wasting money, and that's not giving you the return on investment that you need for it. Now, the extension for CIA goes back, 30 years or more. The extension for this, we have one that's not used too often, but non-repudiation. Non-repudiation is largely in the realm of cryptographic signatures and assurance that if somebody is sending or receiving information, that they cannot deny that they either sent or received that information. So, the sender denying that they sent something by having good cryptographic signing that can be, tied back to an individual, that gives that non-repudiation in that way as well. And good logging allows for the receiver to receive a message and have it logged to prove that they actually did receive it. Now, safety is an interesting one. Safety is becoming more and more important. It's never going to merge its way into the CIA triangle, but it sort of encompasses and underlines a lot of things. And this is because we have a lot of information systems that are having a real-world physical impact. If you look at autonomous self-driving vehicles, some of these self-driving vehicles are network connected and have had vulnerabilities that allow people to remotely control that autonomous vehicle to the point of disabling brakes or increasing speed. I don't know about you, but when it comes to confidentiality, integrity, and availability, if I have a 2-ton monster racing down the road at me, I'm most worried about the safety of that device right there. So safety for these operational technology, OT, or physical devices, safety is a very important part and must be considered in the overall cyber and information security space for it. Now, attacks against confidentiality, you remember we talked about the data breaches and the information being exposed. Have I been pwned? The information is beautiful website. A server can be compromised and the database of personal information is made public. That is a very perfect breach of confidentiality. Some of these were even more serious than others. Some of them you go, oh, Adobe leaked my information. I hate Adobe. Ashley Madison was a website in the United States many years ago that got compromised. Ashley Madison was one of those dating websites, but it was for married people that were having affairs. So the only people that ever used the Ashley Madison website were married, looking for an affair online. Obviously not that great, but they were keeping everyone's information private until someone broke in, stole the database of all the user accounts and email addresses, and made it public. Now here's people that were married that have the information leaked out that they were on a website to have affairs. Really interesting thing, the email addresses, some people were using their work email addresses. So it was exposing people in high positions in universities. It was exposing high-level politicians that actually was then ruining their careers, because many politicians put forward that face of, oh, I'm family-oriented and look at my family and aren't we wonderful, and then boom, I'm having an affair online. Yeah, not a wonderful thing. Even more so that some people, when this information was made public that they were using this website, I don't know if it was 100%, might just be rumors, but some people actually making suicide of themselves and dying from the overall embarrassment and the personal impact that it was having in their lives. So yeah, not an interesting thing to happen to the individuals, but really interesting from the perspective of information security. Think about the personal information that your organizations are holding, and think about the ways that that can impact people's lives if that information was to be made public. In Australia recently, a couple years ago, we had a major private health insurance fund have a massive data breach. All the information was leaked out. Now, this information, at first glance, you go, oh, it's health insurance. What's a big deal about that? but it actually had records of what treatments people were having. So if you were being treated for cancer, now that information is made public. If you had an abortion, now that information is made public. So really damaging to a lot of people. So you have to think about, confidentiality is not just simply usernames and passwords. Think about all the personal information your organizations hold, not just for students, not just for staff, not just for, members of the public, but the staff side of things inside, that you may have tax file information, you may have personal information for human resource records. So there's a lot of things that go beyond normal computer system information. Now, integrity is attacked through modifying information or modifying the pointer to the information. So modifying information, the Zone H and that website defacement, people would break into websites and change them. That is attacking the integrity for it. Some people may, attackers, criminals, may break into the domain registrar for a company. And if they can break into the domain registrar, they can take a domain name and point it somewhere else, pointing to a totally different website, putting up a fake website at that point. Now, they haven't compromised the web server itself, but for everybody publicly visiting that website domain name, they would be seeing a totally different website, making it look like the web server had been compromised. But in reality, it was the pointer, that domain name and the DNS records that point the A record or the C name to the correct web server. And of course, availability is attacked through many different ways. The most common ones, we talked about DOS attacks, we talked about DDoS attacks on Monday. This is a little bit of a review of it, but DDoS attacks and DOS attacks can be done in a lot of different ways. You can go after applications and operating systems, and of course, you can flood bandwidth against a server or the network. So the server operating system, we talked about connection tables and upstream connections causing denial of service. You can also go after vulnerabilities on systems, causing them to crash or reboot, constantly rebooting into a loop. And of course, the actual resources on a server can be attacked. If anybody has seen the crypto mining malicious software that gets installed, where it actually ends up driving your CPU to 100% because it's doing crypto mining on the infected computer. Taking up CPU resources means that there's less CPU resources for legitimate actions on that computer system. So that can actually have a lot of problems there. Similarly, if you have a router that had a vulnerability, has some malware installed on it, your router is now acting as a part of a botnet. So that can be chewing up your bandwidth and chewing up these resources that you might have on it. Now, these denial of service things, these can also involve malicious insiders. You can have someone inside your organization that actually does something wrong on purpose or by accident that causes the loss of availability. Someone follows a Stack Overflow post, and in there, buried in the scripting language is rm-rf/. Boom, the availability of your server is gone. You could also have malicious insiders where they bring in a USB drive with a virus on it. Someone outside gave them money to come in and do ransomware on the inside of the network. The easiest way for viruses to come in is through the front door as someone carries it in on a USB drive. So the common defenses for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. For confidentiality, we need to keep information private or confidential. Access control is the first one, making sure that existing access control systems are in place. These can be as simple as file system access controls. This can be network-based access controls as well. And encrypting of the data. By the nature of encrypting data, only those that have the decryption key can gain access to that information. So even if it is copied, then the people that have the copy can't get access to it. So if we look at ransomware, where you can do the two-stage ransomware attack, where not only do they break into your network and encrypt your hard drives, but before that, they steal all the information off of your infected computers. They steal the information, then encrypt the hard drives. You're now stuck with encrypted hard drives, but even if you recover that, they have a copy of your data. That copy of the data can then be exposed to other people. If that data is encrypted, then you're maintaining the confidentiality of that information. So having the combination of both access control and encryption can really aid in protecting confidentiality. For integrity, we're looking at ways to prevent and detect changes to the information that are unauthorized or undetected. Now, obviously, access control leads to this one as well, but specific ones, hashing, encryption, and digital signatures. If you encrypt the information, then the only modification that you can make is to the encrypted data. And obviously that would then destroy it and make it detectable that something has changed. Hashing is a very common way of taking plain text information and building up signatures that if anything were to change, even the smallest little 1 or 0 bit being flipped, would then have a very different hash output to that. So hashing databases, these are built with file integrity monitoring software or FIM software. Tripwire is the big popular one that has had the open source in the past. And of course, similar to hashing is digital signatures, where not only is it a hash, but it is a hash that is being signed through the digital signature process. And availability is pretty straightforward. Availability is the one that everybody learns, from the basics, because of course you want to make sure you have good uptime and availability. So redundancy, HA, also patching. Patching allows you to maintain uptime. Even though the patching may require reboots, the patching prevents vulnerabilities from being exploited. And a lot of vulnerabilities allow for the crashing or remote control of a system that then has a much bigger impact on your availability. You may have to increase resources, RAM, CPU, disk, bandwidth, backups, and don't forget about the more administrative side of things. DR and BCP cannot be underestimated on the power for availability. Because remember, availability isn't just the point in time, is it accessible now? But if we have a loss of a server now, how quickly can we get a replacement up and running? If you have good DR and BCP and you practice it, you will have everything proceduralized. You'll have your SOP, you'll get everything back and running in a nice, quick, timely fashion. Sure, you will have availability, but the total time of that will be shortened from it. Questions? We got another question up front.
So I was just asking about the advanced, can you hear me? Is it fine? Advanced persistent threats, APTs.
Yes.
Do you have any strategies for implementing APTs?
Yeah, so, wait, implementing or blocking APT?
Tackling.
Attacking, okay. I'm not going to teach you how to be
implementing solution for APTs.
Yeah. So, as much as some APTs are truly advanced in the nature of developing new processes, tools, techniques, and procedures, a little known fact is that a lot of APTs are just using publicly accessible tools and techniques and procedures. So the TTPs that some APTs are using, if you're catching up on my acronyms here, are just public. And it's the matter of chaining together existing tools and techniques to then get their desired outcome. The biggest point for advanced persistent threat is the P, persistent. For a lot of attackers can take tools and try different things, but if they can't get into your system easily, they're just going to go, oh, I'm going to move on to another system. It's the low-hanging fruit, right? If the apple is here, I'm going to grab it. If I need to get a ladder to get up to get an apple, I got to go all the way over there to go get my ladder and then come back. It's not worth it. Guy over here's got a lower hanging fruit. I'm just gonna grab the apple or the pear or whatever from over here. Persistent is where they say, I'm going to get your fruit and I don't care how long it's going to take. And the analogy goes further. Because fruit trees, when the fruit gets heavier, it starts coming down a bit, right? So as it ripens, some fruit will hang a little bit lower. And it's a matter of looking at it and going, if I wait long enough, there will be a vulnerability, and I'm just going to keep watching. And these persistent threats, do that. They will be scanning your network on a regular basis, looking for vulnerabilities. Because remember, vulnerabilities change over time. Not only the vulnerabilities that you have, but when a new vulnerability is discovered and released, you may have that new vulnerability. And there's that window of time from when the vulnerability is discovered, released, and weaponized to when you patch. And if that's one day, and if they're watching, and if they can spot that one time, they will get into your network at that one time. It's that dangerousness of persistence, of saying, I'm getting into your network, and I don't care if I have to wait for 6 months until I find the opportunity to do it, I'm going to do it. I don't care if it takes phishing email every day of the week until I get that one person who clicks on it or opens an attachment or takes the USB drive in and plugs it into the network or whatever it is. So APT is the persistence, but the advanced part, some of them truly are advanced, don't get me wrong, but some of them just take existing tools and they put them together in a nice little chain, and they do a really good job at doing that. And you'll see the APTs, you go to the MITRE ATT&CK framework and you see how the APTs are being documented. Many APTs use the same TTPs over and over and over again. They're not doing anything magical, and it's all documented in the
Thank you so much for the
frameworks.
clarification.
Yeah.
And do you think the zero trust architecture, the TA, is it the solution for the APTs?
Zero trust is a solution for a lot of weaknesses. Absolutely. Zero trust
if your
is
system is a
gaining
complex
traction.
system,
Yeah.
if your system is a complex, you are deploying from services, different cloud service providers from. You are getting services from different cloud providers.
Yeah.
So in that case, your system is complex, and how do you sort of implement such architectures?
From the simple perspective, all zero trust is that every service being accessed verifies that you are who you say you are. From a simple perspective, that's all zero trust is. You take the old style of networking where you come into the office, you plug the network cable in, and the firewalls and the access restrictions allow anybody who's physically in the office to gain access to certain services. That's the opposite of zero trust. Implementing zero trust in that point of view is basically saying, for each service, I don't care what your source IP address is, I will always authenticate you every single time. So it's as simple as that. So, if you can take every one of your services and put them on public IP addresses, of course they're going to have to authenticate everybody every single time, right? So it's the matter of that type of thinking, is that there's no trust based on existing criteria. Zero trust is no trust, is that I need to authenticate every person every single time for every service that they're talking to. And then of course there's technology to make that easier to implement. But the understanding, pretty straightforward. So for example, if you have a VPN that drops you into a private IP address on your network, that's not zero trust. So if you have a VPN that does that, then you don't have zero trust fully implemented. Google went through and did zero trust. This was, what did they call it? Oh, I can't remember the name of it now. It was an internal name beyond zero trust. Beyond Corp. That's it. I knew I'd get it. So Google implemented zero trust even before zero trust had the big name. Their internal project was called Beyond Corp. You can probably look it up. And it basically was that any internal service would have access from the outside world, but it would always be authenticated. So, you would hit an intermediary point to do your authentication and then pass you over to that service and say, yes, this person's authenticated, let them access that corporate resource, which is usually the internal side of their network. So from a simple perspective. From a technology, yeah, there's heaps of providers that do it in all sorts of different ways. But yeah, you want every system to authenticate every single time. Now, any other questions? Yeah. Thank you, sir. Just back a bit, yeah.
Thank you, Jimmy, for the nice presentation, and I'm really pleased to be part of this training workshop.
Thank you.
My question is, that you talked about an asset in the start.
Yes.
So, are there possible means to make that an asset doesn't look like it's an asset, or it's something like the gold is mixed in soil or whatsoever, so you skip all those expensive security measures. So it's just a philosophical kind of thing. So and also, how can it be used in these networks or to cybersecurity? Are there concepts about this?
Yeah, so absolutely. So, in your talking of making an asset not look like an asset, that's called deceptive technology. And there are ways to deceive attackers to thinking that something is not as valuable. But the other way is, like with honeypots and honey nets, where you're deceiving the attacker that something over here looks more valuable. Maybe they spend their time on that. And that actually allows you to see where the attackers are coming from. And if you're doing a honeypot properly, you can monitor the tools, techniques, and procedures that they are using to try and find and break into that system, as well as seeing where they're coming from. If you have a honeypot on the inside of your network and somebody is touching it, maybe you have an insider. Or maybe you have an attacker who's already compromised the machine in your network, and they're using that to pivot and do lateral, scanning within your network and looking for these things. So you can do deception to make something look less important, as well as fake things making it look more important. But yeah, no, it's a very real thing. Usually that's for more mature level of defenses. If you don't have anti-malware and detection and response software on all your devices, if you don't have centralized logging, if you don't have a SIEM, if you don't have procedures, you would do all those things first before doing deceptive technologies. A honeypot is not going to protect your entire network. It's going to give you the intelligence to find what's going on, how it's being done, and use that knowledge to protect other things in the future. So yeah, deceptive technology is on the more mature end of things. But yeah, no, good question. Any other questions? Down at the back, we'll take that. Oh, where's my runner? My runner wasn't here. Thank you to the cameraman for that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your such a nice basic security session.
Thank you.
My question is beyond this presentation. I'm working on the heterogeneity in the Internet of Things and working on the security management protocol.
Yep.
What do you think that can we define the heterogeneity, that the heterogeneous encryption known as hyperelliptic curve cryptography?
Mm-hmm.
Can you briefly explain this?
Yeah, so the advanced cryptography.
Just like, let
Yeah.
me explain. Briefly.
Yeah.
We have RSA,
Yeah.
Revis Shamir Erliman, and we have the elliptic curve cryptography.
Yep.
And the next one is the hyperelliptic curve cryptography. And this is the latest version, and the key size for the hyperelliptic curve cryptography is 180 bits, I think so.
Yep.
And for the hyperelliptic, using that keys is 80 bit, reducing the key size from the elliptic curve to the 80 bits. So the security level is down. When we improve the security,
Yep.
the key size is also improved.
Yes.
So can we use any other mechanism within the hyperelliptic curve cryptography that we can implement inside the heterogeneous encryptions, which is provide the basic security properties such as confidentiality, integrity, authentication, and non-repudiation, and scalability, availability, and so on,
Yep.
unforgeability.
Yep. Yeah, I will admit I don't have an expert knowledge of heterogeneous encryption. If we're looking at standard elliptic curve cryptography and the advancements, say, with quantum computing and how that's bringing down the layer of security for that, the understanding that I have for quantum cryptography weakening security is that it's basically bringing it down sometimes by half. And with that nature, yes, you would just be going for a larger key size to overcome that halving of the security for the cryptography that you have. They are also working on standardization for quantum safe encryption. I think Kyber is one of them, or there might be some other names around Kyber. Again, brand new. I don't fully understand them other than they exist.
This is actually the trade-off
Yeah,
between the security and the cost.
absolutely.
When we improve the security, the cost is also improved.
Yes, yep.
When we do,
And some of the difficulties with that is that it will take more resources to implement these higher levels of encryption, not just the key sizes, but the processing power for that. This happened years ago with AES. When AES became
Advanced
the
Encryption
standard,
Standard, yes.
yeah, the Advanced Encryption Standard, when that became the standard, we then saw AES mathematical transformations being embedded into generic processors, into CPUs, so that now every processor that you can buy, AES is done in hardware rather than in software, giving you performance improvements so that if you're running things like AES as part of your encryption, whether it be for websites or disk encryption, it will be as fast as your CPU can be fast. We will see, hopefully, that progressing into the future as well, that these quantum safe encryption, as they become more popular and standardized and accepted, that hopefully we will see that brought into the silicon so that we're not dealing with the performance impact of having to do larger key sizes and more complex encryption algorithms. But yeah, I'm not the cryptography PhD expert or anything. But you know, from the practical point of view, that's my hopes, is that the same thing that happened with AES onto the silicon will happen for Kyber or any of these new encryption algorithms, that it can go down to the silicon and allow it to be, you know, fast line speed encryption, hopefully. So.
this is another security parameter known as encryption. This encryption as algorithm provides, as compared to traditional approach, just as the encryption plus signature
Yep.
within two individual cycles.
Yes.
This encryption combine these two cycles with a single and comparatively reduce the cost 86%
Yep.
as compared to, and provide the basic security properties such as CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability,
Yep.
and forward security, just known as forward secrecy and backward secrecy. This is the additional security properties which provide this encryption. And the first time it is introduced in 1997.
Yep.
So this is a good parameter in the field of the cryptography.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, we haven't solved all the problems that cryptography can help us with. So yeah, there's a lot of work still to be done. And then the implementation is another story for that. You know, the practical implementation of cryptography is where we're going to run into problems. We've had problems in the past, and you know, we'll see that in the future as well. But yeah, no, good points on crypto advancements. Yeah.
And the next one is HECC. This is another parameter which reduce the cost up to half as compared to the ECC.
Mm-hmm.
WhatsApp using the ECC for the end-to-end encryption.
Yep.
And the HECC is the advanced version of the elliptic curve cryptography, and provide the same security for as compared to the ECC, but reduce the cost
Yep.
comparatively half.
Yes. Yep.
So this is a good parameter, but up to specific level 1, level 2, level 3, and when we beyond the level 3, the security properties reduced totally. This HECC is completely plough.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
cannot recommend the HECC to use, because the on the level 4, HECC totally plough.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't. I'm not familiar with the advanced ECC that's being used for WhatsApp and that. But but yeah, it's, there's always going to be problems that are found with cryptography, and it's a matter of making sure that the developers are kept aware of the advancements of it. It's like with anything, that there may be vulnerabilities found in something or weaknesses in implementation. So anybody who is deploying cryptography, such as on WhatsApp, has to understand what to be deployed and when to change that what they're doing is not appropriate. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. My question is related to APTs in cloud environment. While implementing zero trust architecture, how it can enhance the security in a cloud environment in a point of view APTs.
So when you think of protection and you think of zero trust, don't think of APT. Think of just any attacker that could be coming after your network. APT is usually reserved for the high end, for the nation states, and those large sponsored attackers and criminal groups in that. The zero trust, if we're looking at the services running in the cloud, it's no different to services that you'd be running on premise. And in fact, the zero trust is more important, as the services in the cloud are generally all public facing. They're all meant to be exposed with some layers of protection, but they're meant to be exposed. The key one to be looking at is, of course, then the common infrastructure for your cloud. You're looking for the administrative accounts that have access to the IAM and making sure that those are extra level of protected. That's where the attackers are going to be going for. In the same way, in virtualized environments, they go after the hypervisor layer so that they can compromise all the virtual machines. If they can go after the console admin accounts for your cloud systems, then that's where they're going to get the access. But the zero trust can be applied to that for authenticating everybody gaining administrator console access to it. But yeah, any of the cloud services, yeah, there's zero trust. Every time something is being accessed, it is validating and verifying that the user is who they say they are and that they are allowed access to it. But yeah, the cloud almost demands zero trust. Anything else is going to be weak. And that's because, you can have the endpoint compromised and have malicious activity exhibiting from the endpoint. And if it's not validating that it actually is the user and not just malicious software, then you'll run into problems like that. Yeah, no worries. Now, it's past 5. I'm not going to hold people up. I know, well, I myself have somewhere to go as well. But thank you very much for your time, for coming back for this third session for the security.